let's start with David Kirby. He's not the Florida poet. If you're familiar with the Florida poet who has the same name, but the California polymath. Is chair of the Department of Interdisciplinary Studies in the Liberal Arts and director of the Science, Technology, and Society program at Cal Poly in San Luis Obispo. Again, there's a detailed bios at lasertalks.com with links to the pages of the speakers. I'll only pick 2 events from his bio that I find particularly telling. His book, Lab Coats in Hollywood, Science, Scientist, and Cinema, which came out 7 or 8 years ago. And then a project for which he received an award titled Playing God, Exploring the Interactions Among the Biosciences, Religion, and Entertainment Media. So this, I think, gives you an idea of the scope of his work, and I think he has a very interesting and entertaining job at Cal Poly. So with that, okay, I'll mute myself and I will leave you the podium.
Okay, yeah, good. Thanks for that introduction. Let me share my screen. Okay, let's go to the. Oh wait, I want to. Let me stop sharing and go to the beginning. Oh wait, sorry, I'm gonna have to reopen it. Didn't like that.
Happens.
Okay. So now I will share the screen.
Good.
Okay, good. Yeah, we're all good to go here. Okay, well, yeah, so thanks for that introduction. What's that?
You have to put it in presentation mode, I think.
Oh, you have to put it in presentation mode.
Show
Okay.
mode.
Yeah.
Show mode. Good.
Okay, there we are. Okay, well, yeah, again, thanks for that introduction. You know, I should say at the beginning, the focus of my research has been on the ways in which, you know, we tell stories about science and technology, right? And also, you know, how those stories can actually impact real world science and technology. So for today's talk, I'm going to be focusing on the ways in which cinematic narratives can impact technological developments. Now, a technological development, right? It's not a predetermined or inevitable outcome, right? There are a lot of obstacles that can impede or alter the development of a potential technology, right? And these things can include, you know, a lack of funding. There could be public apathy. You know, no one sees a need for the technology. There could be potential concerns about the risk that a technology might have. Or there might just be a fundamental belief that, you know, this technology just won't work. So for designers and engineers, right, the best way for them to jumpstart technological development is to produce a physical working prototype. But yeah, working prototypes, they're pretty time consuming. They're expensive. They actually require some initial funds, quite a bit of initial funds. And it may be the case that they just won't work either. And even with a working prototype, right, there's still the hurdle of trying to convince people that they actually need this technology. So what I found in my work is that scientists and engineers who consulted on popular films, like the ones that you see on this screen, they had, you know, what we could call an unprecedented opportunity to create what I refer to as diegetic prototypes, right? That is, they created depictions of future technologies within the fictional world, and the fictional world is what, you know, film scholars refer to as the diegeses. So they created these depictions of future technologies within the fictional world as a means by which to stimulate desire in audiences to see those potential technologies become realities. And what I found is that, diegetic prototypes, in fact, have a major advantage even over real world prototypes. Because in the diegeses, right, in that fictional space, these technologies exist as quote unquote real objects, right? Because they're objects that function properly and which people actually use and interact with in their world. And they interact with them in ways that can suggest to the audience, the social possibilities of those technologies. So these cinematic depictions of future technologies, right, they can demonstrate to mass public audiences the possible uses and consequences of the technologies. Now, the concept of the diegetic prototype, this builds upon the notion of prototypes as what sociologist Lucy Sussman calls performative artifacts. And as performative artifacts, diegetic prototypes, they can contextualize embryonic technologies within a social context, and they can help establish, right, which aspects of these technologies meet the social needs of potential users. Now, I also found that it's the case that diegetic prototypes are most effective when they're actually placed within mundane settings, right? As though the technology was already a commonplace technology within these fictional worlds. Because in those cases, what is extraordinary to us becomes ordinary. And therefore, it seems to be more possible. So diegetic prototypes are in essence what I also call pre-product placements, right? So you hopefully know what a product placement is, right? And just as with a real product placement, the goal is to instill a desire in the audience for these products. But the only way for the audience to get these pre-products is if they support their development. So designers and engineers, they create diegetic prototypes and they enhance the realism of these prototypes by being able to influence the dialogue, the props, the plot rationalizations, character interactions, and narrative structures of the stories they're embedded within. And for a diegetic prototype to be successful, in instilling a desire in the audience to see that technology developed in the real world, a film has to establish three things about these cinematic technologies, the ones that you see there on the screen. So they have to show that the technology works, right? That it's actually viable. That's certainly one goal, but that's actually not enough to foster public support for a potential technology. They also need these cinematic depictions to convey a sense that there's a real need, right? Or even better, what we would call an urgent necessity for the technology. And then finally, they need to demonstrate that the technology poses little risk to the public or to anyone who's working with the technology, right? Meaning they have to show that the technology is harmless. So I'm going to start here with an example of a film that many of you have probably seen. It's the Disney film Big Hero 6. And that movie actually contains a diegetic prototype as its breakout star. And hopefully this example, will elucidate what diegetic prototypes are, how they operate, and why they are ultimately successful. So it should give you a sense as to how a fictional narrative within a visual medium can incite technological development by highlighting the possibilities of a future technology. So for Big Hero 6, there were a large number of roboticists who advised the filmmakers in creating Baymax, so you see there at the top. And they influenced how Baymax was being depicted in the film. And predominantly, these were roboticists working with Chris Atkinson, who's a robotics professor at Carnegie Mellon University. And you can see one of his former students there on the bottom, Siddharth Sanan, who's now at Harvard University. So the goal of these roboticists in working on the film was to help the filmmakers, design Baymax as a diegetic prototype that would help them garner financial support for the development of real-world soft medical robots. So how did Atkinson and his robotics group utilize this diegetic prototype to establish desire in the audience, to overcome what are real-world obstacles to getting soft medical robots, right, and try and pave the way for soft medical robots to become a reality? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show a short clip from the film that demonstrates how the roboticists helped the filmmakers achieve all three of the goals that you see there on the screen, and did it in a single scene. So in the scene we're about to watch, the character known as Tadashi, he's showing his younger brother Hiro his school project, which happens to be the soft medical robot, Baymax.
I will scan you now. Scan complete. You have a slight epidermal abrasion on your forearm. I suggest an antibacterial spray.
Whoa, whoa, whoa. What's in the spray specifically?
The primary ingredient is bacitracin.
It's a bummer. I'm actually allergic to that.
You are not allergic to bacitracin. You do have a mild allergy to peanuts.
Not bad. You've done some serious coding on this thing, huh?
Uh-huh. Programmed him with over 10,000 medical procedures. This chip is what makes Baymax, Baymax.
Final?
Yeah, going for a non-threatening, huggable kind of thing.
Looks like a walking marshmallow. No offense.
I am a robot. I cannot be offended.
Hyperspectral cameras?
Yep.
Huh.
Titanium skeleton.
Carbon fiber.
Right. Even lighter. Killer actuators. Where did you get those?
I machined him right here in-house.
Really?
Yep. He can lift 1,000 pounds.
Shut up.
You have been a good boy. Have a lollipop.
Nice.
I cannot deactivate until you say you are satisfied with your care.
Well then, I'm satisfied with my care.
He's gonna help a lot of people.
Hey, what kind of battery does it use?
Lithium ion.
You know, supercapacitors would charge way faster.
Burning the midnight oil.
Okay, so hopefully, you can clearly see from that clip why these roboticists were excited to work on this film, right? Because that scene easily established the three goals that you see there on the screen, right? For one, it demonstrates the viability of the technology, right? I mean, Baymax works perfectly from the outset. He identifies the medical issue. We just saw the brother rip off some tape off of Hiro's arm, and Baymax was able to diagnose that very quickly, right? There's shown to be a need for the technology, right? The clear message in the movie is that there's a need for soft medical robots that help people. And you even hear Tadashi actually saying, quote, he's going to help a lot of people. And it also shows a need by showing that, unlike other types of medical robots, Baymax is, quote, non-threatening and huggable. And finally, they also help the filmmakers establish that these robots aren't going to cause any harm, right? Because one key concern that people have about medical robots and medical AI is that it's going to be prone to misdiagnosis, right? But that scene clearly shows Baymax is not tricked by Hiro into providing a false diagnosis, right? By telling him, no, you're not allergic to bacitracin. My diagnosis is correct and the treatment I have is correct. So if you want to generate public excitement and to generate funding to develop your technology, right, it's really hard to beat having a diegetic prototype in a successful Academy Award-winning movie. And within the film world, right, that diegetic prototype, it worked properly, it was safe, and it was going to save lives. So why wouldn't audiences want to see Baymax in the real world? And you can see here that Atkinson, he even set up a whole website devoted to public fundraising, built around the idea of making Baymax real, right? And so by showing everyone in a big Hollywood movie, works, we need it, and it's harmless, he can convince people they want that robot. Okay, so we'll move on. So we can look at another example here, right? So In this example, I'm going to talk again about how a diegetic prototype, employed narrative elements to instill a desire in the audience for the technology. Now, the most successful cinematic technologies are the ones that are taken for granted, right? They are the ones in which the characters in the diegesis treat it as a sort of natural part of their environment. So the technologies, they not only appear normal while they're on the screen, but they also fit seamlessly into the entire diegetic world. So in these cases, audiences are going to accept as true that the characters, they will still be using these technologies even when they're off screen. So John Underkoffler, who you see there on the right, he served as the technical advisor on Minority Report. And he worked very heavily on what's called a gestural interface used by Tom Cruise's character, kind of John Anderton, to move images around on the screen by just moving his hands. Now, Underkoffler, he wanted that gestural interface technology in the film, to look like Anderton had used it many times before it appeared on the screen, and that he was going to use it again, even when the camera was somewhere else. Now, one of the ways he accomplished that was to, acknowledge a potential design flaw in the technology. Perfection is actually a mistake made with most cinematic depictions of technology, right? Because that does not mesh with most people's experiences of technology. So we're going to see an example here of how Underkoffler introduced a design flaw into the depiction in order to increase its effectiveness as a diegetic prototype. So in the scene we're going to watch, Anderton is using the gestural interface to look for where a crime is going to be committed, and someone interrupts him.
Chief, we got a problem with our location. It's no longer there.
Time frame?
13 minutes.
Hey, Chief. Investigator from the feds here.
Yeah, I don't need some twink from the Fed poking around right now.
John, I wrote it down on your calendar. I left you a message at your house.
Check in with the papers they had it forwarded. See if the neighbors knew where they went. Check all relations.
Checking neighbors and relations.
But John,
Fletch, just get him some coffee. Tell him some stories how I save your ass every day and you can't live without me.
I got coffee, thank you. Danny Whitmer, twink from the Fed. Whoops, gum?
Sorry, Danny, I'm gonna have to give you the full tour some other time.
The Marxists moved a couple of weeks ago. Nobody knows where, still searching for family and employer.
Time horizon 12 minutes.
all right, what he's doing now we call scrubbing the image, looking for clues as to where the murder is gonna happen.
Original running bond brick pattern, streamline early Georgian details. The brick has been repointed.
Okay, so in the case of this gestural interface, right, Underkoffler reasoned that the technology's design would make it incredibly sensitive to the user's hand motions, so that when he goes to shake that guy's hand, everything on the screen was going to be squished into a corner. And this flaw actually served Underkoffler's goal of convincing the technology that convincing the public that his technology could function in the real world, right? Because one major concern that's been expressed about potential gestural interface technologies is the possibility that they won't be sensitive enough to the hand movements in order for them to be considered useful, right? So the quote unquote flaw in this diegetic prototype was not really a design flaw. Underkoffler intentionally included it to highlight the fact that the technology worked too well. So his approaches to this diegetic prototype in Minority Report, it directly led to the funds he needed to start his company Oblong Industries and to turn that diegetic prototype into a physical prototype. And you can see that from his quote here. Now, from Underkoffler's perspective, right, his work on Minority Report, it wasn't simply a minor component in the development story. His well worked out diegetic prototype was actually the crucial element in the development process. Okay, so I originally came up with the concept of the diegetic prototype in the context of scientists and engineers and designers working on Hollywood movies, right? Trying to instill a desire in people to make, want to see that technology become a reality. But the concept has actually been adopted since then by the design community, especially by those who engaged in the practice of design fiction. And I would single out here and want to sort of acknowledge Julian Bleecker from the Near Future Laboratory down in Los Angeles as one of the sort of main proponents of design fiction. So by deploying diegetic prototypes, designers who use design fiction have a better way to produce insights about how people might adopt or discard or reappropriate or sometimes revive a technology. And importantly, this means that design fiction is an approach that embeds the potential social impacts and unforeseen consequences of technological development into the design process, rather than seeing these concerns as something of an afterthought. Now, design fiction allows designers to explore the implications of new technologies once they have become embedded and normal and everyday. So as an example, like you see on the left, right, a designer can easily create some sort of fantastical gesture-based computer interface for a mobile phone. But by taking a design fiction approach, that helps the designer to realize the potential social implications that such a technology might have. For example, the potential for some workers to actually develop repetitive stress injury from using that technology. Right? Likewise, a designer can easily create, some sort of sleek, futuristic, self-driving car. Right? They can highlight its fancy new features, including its safety features. But when you are taking a design fiction approach, like the designers at the Near Future Laboratory, right, they can also highlight the social implications of the technology. Right? Is there a mechanism to control where the car goes or how fast it goes if you give your keys to your teenage son who needs to get to soccer practice? I mean, will parking lots be the same if cars are shared and they're constantly on the move? What will happen to public transportation? And will there be subsidies for those who can't afford to actually buy their own car? So by utilizing design fiction and diegetic prototypes to probe the possible implications, risks, and unforeseen consequences of potential technologies, the goal is to make a future that's more inhabitable, sustainable, and equitable for everyone. And that, I think, is a good thing. And I will stop there.
Thank you, David. So I took a lot of notes. I
Okay.
have my own questions for you. So first of all, thank you for introducing us to the Near Future Lab.
Yeah.
Maybe that's a future laser talk.
Oh yeah, it should be. Julian's an interesting guy.
First of all, you want to say a few words on the etymology of the word diegetic? That's the Greek word is diegesis, right?
Yeah. So it's a word I say that film scholars use, but a lot of people, anyone who studies sort of fiction talks about the diegesis. It's a way to separate what's going on in the outside world from what's happening within that fictional world, so that you can talk about the fictional world as an actual place without always saying, remember, this is a fictional world and the things happening there. So you just say in the diegesis, this is happening. And so the diegetic prototype, when I was, trying to come up with the phrase, I thought about something like science fiction prototype, but I thought, well, these aren't always science fiction. And also the idea that, well, it's a prototype that's within the fictional world that's sort of operating. And so that's how I came up with the idea of, diegetic prototype.
And what would be the opposite diegetic prototype? I think most science fiction movies serve the opposite purpose.
You mean sort of like, and still, I mean, that's one of the things, I mean, the design fiction uses the diegetic prototype as a tool, and I conceived of it as a way to instill desire. People say, I want that thing. But you're right, in a lot of science fiction movies, the technology is bad. But those who do design fiction, they would claim that, well, that is the point of design fiction, is that you want to identify these potential problems. What might be some things that are unforeseen consequences of the particular technology? So the people I was studying, they wanted to instill that particular desire. And in fact, one guy who worked on, I'm blanking on what he worked on. He worked on a film with sort of AI associated with it. And he got so angry when they made it a little bit, kind of bad, that he quit because he wanted AI to be a reality. And so he said, nope, I'm not going to be your consultant anymore. You've made it look too bad. And that's not the goal. That's not my goal in working on this film. So you can, and especially in, dystopias, you can get that type of thing.
Okay. You mentioned a sociologist, I missed the name, who talks about performative artifacts.
Yeah, her name is Lucy Suchman. It's Suchman. She's at Lancaster University over in the UK. And she's talked, she's a sort of sociologist of technology. And she's talked about, what do prototypes in general, how do they operate? And she talks about them as performative, right? That they're not just sort of saying, hey, look, this thing works. You're doing a whole performance around them to show people kind of the three goals that I was talking about as well. Mm-hmm. To say, okay, it's not just that it works, but you need this. Look at these functions. Look at how it's operating. And diegetic prototypes, they're performative at a sort of another level because they're now in performances as well.
Mm-hmm. Now, you mentioned yet a slide that should interest a lot of startups, because that slide said that these prototypes generate, prove that the technology is viable, is needed, it's harmless. Are you aware of, other than the inventor you mentioned, but are you aware of corporations that actively try to do that try to cooperate with a studio to make a movie about the technology they want to develop?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, the Near Future Laboratory, they're not the only ones who are doing design fiction. There's a lot of other people who are doing design fiction, and the Near Future Laboratory has worked with a number of different companies. And when they make a movie, they're not necessarily making the type of Hollywood movies that I was talking about. They make more sort of fictional movies set, like I said, in sort of mundane worlds, right? So the one with the cell phones that I talked about, where they were looking at sort of uses, these gestural things, how it's going to impact people. And it was basically just a woman who wakes up and has to do various things. And there's a courier who comes, and the courier is having stress-related, problems because they're always having to move their arms like this. So they are using fiction, but it's not, your sort of high fiction like you would see in a Hollywood movie. So they're using these sort of, it's related to scenario building in some ways. And they also see them more as sort of provocations, right? So the idea is you make this film showing these potential consequences of the technology, good and bad, in order to get the companies thinking about this, right? Thinking about, what might they need to do when they're designing their particular products.
Okay, thank you very much.